There's a lot of chatter. There's a lot of momentum for Oregon's West Coast rival, USC. Are the Trojans becoming more of a threat to the Ducks' on-field success? Which lesser-known Oregon players are set to break out in 2025? I've got 3 that are on my mind. This is That Show Out West. Welcome to That Show Out West for That Team Out West, an unbiased, neutral observer's view of Oregon Ducks football. I'm Ted LaRue. Boy, it seems par for the course lately that every time I come on and talk to you guys, we talk about the excitement. We talk about new things that are going on here at TSOW, and the beginning of this show is no different. I am stoked for Monday's edition of TSOW because we are making That Show Out West history. The very first guest in TSOW history will be joining me on Monday. And folks, it is a big one. The director of content with the Ducks Rising NIL group, Travis Rook-Lay, will be joining me on Monday to talk about all of the great things that Ducks Rising is doing, for all the great content that they're pushing out over there, and exclusive content for their subscribers certainly over there, and what they're doing to help retain some of these great players at Oregon and to help build championship rosters for the future for Ducks football. We're going to be talking some Ducks ball, of course, with Travis as well. So you are not going to want to miss that show on Monday. It's going to be, I think, a really, really good conversation. Some mornings you just wake up and you know what? Today's going to be a good day. And that's how I felt this morning. Turns out I was right because we've got a new commitment for the class of 2026. 4-star safety Xavier Larice committed to Oregon this morning. 5'10", 185-pound safety from Melbourne, Florida. He chose the Ducks over Notre Dame, Alabama, and Auburn. And here's what Xavier had to say regarding his choice. Quote, "Oregon is just different. I went out there for a game this past season, and they shot up my list. I have yet to experience it, but when you watch it on television and when you hear what a lot of these other people say, whether it's longtime season ticket holders or national media personalities that go to a game there and just describe how great of an atmosphere it truly is in Eugene, to be able to display that, to be able to show that off is a game changer, and it's things that certainly sticks with some of these young kids. And it certainly stuck with Xavier in this instance. Maybe we'll break down his tape a little bit more on Monday. Let's go a little bit further down the Oregon recruiting trail, and we talk about visits to elite level 2026 5-star recruits are booked for Eugene this summer. 5-star offensive tackle Jackson Cantwell and Mark Bowman, the elite level tight end, are both coming to Eugene on the same weekend, June 20th, which also happens to be the same weekend of my 6th wedding anniversary. So I'm taking that as a good omen for the future for both of these guys. That's how I'm choosing to personally view this situation right now. Let's start first and talk about Jackson. And I've kind of broke down his tape and what kind of an elite level player he is. He's the number 2 overall player in the latest release of the updated On 300 right now. And we've heard that Emmanuel Iheanacho, Oregon is the leader for him right now, and already Cody Green committed to this class. Cody Green is number 9 in the latest On 300. He really shot up that list as well. So can you have 3 top 10 overall players both playing the same position in one class? Well, we're certainly going to find out, but maybe things are warming up a little bit for Jackson Cantwell. Here's what Jackson had to say recently to On3's Steve Wiltfong. Quote, "I think my favorite head coach still to this day has been Dan Lanning. I think everyone can understand. Great guy, Missouri guy." And this is just another example of what we've heard people say about Dan Lanning. He is as good as any coach, and he might be the best in the country at forming and developing relationships when it comes to recruiting. He is forming that small town Missouri relationship. Of course, that's where Dan is from, and that's where Jackson is playing his high school football right now, and he's finding a connection with Jackson to be able to form that relationship, and we'll see. I think that one's going to be very difficult, but we'll see if Jackson is going to be able to make his way to Eugene, Oregon, certainly eventually. This could be a loaded offensive tackle class, no matter which way it pans out, certainly for the Ducks going forward. Of course, Mark Bowman has that Matter Day connection. We've kind of broke down the whole tight end recruitment situation in the previous shows of TSOW. I maybe feel between both of these guys, I love that we got them on campus. And here's another thing. Oregon is slated to be, as of right now, the last visit for both of these guys in June. Saving the best for last? I certainly like that. But I think I'm feeling a little bit more optimistic and positive right now, maybe about Cantwell as opposed to Mark Bowman right now. I think Bowman might be trending a little bit towards the USC Trojans as time continues to go on, as we get closer to some of these commitment times. But oh boy, if you like recruiting, this is certainly your time of year, and it is getting exciting, hot, spicy, and fun for the Oregon Ducks. Speaking of USC, speaking of recruiting, there was a lot of chatter. There was an online buzz regarding the four-star quarterback flip of Jonas Williams from Oregon over to USC. Got a lot of people talking. Is USC starting to take back over on the West Coast? Are the Trojans really becoming a growing threat to that of the Oregon Ducks on the West Coast? Now, people will say, I think, certain things to fit their narratives, and that's cool, and that's fine. People can say what they want. But I think you and I both know the situation with Jonas Williams and why that played out the way it did. When Oregon is declared a leader, one of the two teams that is in the hunt for Jared Curtis, when Oregon is pushing their chips into the middle of the Jared Curtis table, these are the kind of things that happen in a recruiting cycle when these events take place. Jonas Williams saw maybe what was happening with Oregon and their priorities at the quarterback position within the 26 class, and he went over to a really good place for quarterbacks as well in Lincoln Riley and USC. If Oregon is able to land Jared Curtis, I think everybody wins in this particular situation. But it does bring up a little bit of a bigger point. Does USC's growing confidence and momentum become a threat to the Oregon Ducks on the field? I think that's the big, because all of this is about winning. You can throw out 4 stars and 5 stars, and that's great when we talk about it in February and March and even in December on the early signing period. But all of this really comes to wins and losses. That's what really matters when I think it all comes down to it. And when you talk about wins and losses, both in recruiting and certainly on the football field, the last 10 years, 15 years, 18 years, I'll talk about that, why that's a key number here in just a little bit, I think has been mostly owned by the Oregon Ducks, certainly on the West Coast when you compare it to the USC Trojans. Oregon has won 10 more games and lost 10 less games over the last 2 years compared to the USC Trojans. Oregon under Dan Lanning is rising up the ladder, increasing their win total, whereas Lincoln Riley, who had a really good first year, may be going down that ladder just a little bit. Since the iPhone was released in 2007, yes, I know I might be cherry picking the date just a little bit, after back-to-back national championships for the USC Trojans. And then, of course, they lost to Texas in that BCS national championship game as well. But that was 2007 when the iPhone was released, which is 18 years ago, which is the age of a high school senior. Since the first iPhone was released, USC has beaten Oregon just 3 times in 11 attempts. The Ducks have won 3 straight and 5 of their last 6. You got the same amount of national champions. Yes, we know you don't have to remind Oregon fans once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. We know what that number is, certainly right now. But USC and Oregon have the same amount of national championships since 2007. They have the same amount of Heisman Trophy winners since 2007. And why is that date important? Because it's currently 2025. That was 2007. 18 years ago, it's the age of a high school senior. A lot of these kids, and especially as more time continues to go by, once you get class of 2026, 27, 28, etc., a lot of these kids for their lifetimes, they didn't see Matt Leinart growing up. They didn't see Reggie Bush growing up. Maybe they saw both of those guys on the Big Noon Kickoff pregame set. But what have they seen on the West Coast? They've seen Oregon's success head-to-head. They've seen more Oregon Conference championships. That's what they've seen, and I think that's been a big part of why Oregon has been able to have the success that they've had recruiting-wise on the West Coast and also on the field. And I think a lot of it has to do in USC just not doing a good job recruiting the state of California. But you cannot deny the impact in a short period of time that general manager Chad Bowden has had so far on campus at USC. I think as more time continues to go by, Oregon is going to have more battles on the West Coast, folks. Is Oregon going to completely dominate on the West Coast like they did prior? I'm hoping they will. Class of 2026, they're still doing a really good job, despite maybe some of the narratives that are certainly sitting out there. But I think there's going to be more battles. Who's going to win those battles? That remains, I think, to be seen. Like, USC is a program that has too many resources. They have too much history right now going for them to be a 7-win team every year, to be an 8-win team every year. But when we talk about USC and the whole threat conversation as it pertains to Oregon, I think the Trojans are playing catch-up. Let's just throw out a hypothetical scenario right now. Let's throw it out. Let's say USC closes out with an absolute bang. I still think Oregon is trending for better players right now than USC is. But let's just say USC ends up with a top 5 class. That'd be one USC top 5 class compared to, and let's just say Oregon. We feel pretty confident that they're going to end up with a top 5 class yet again. We know that Dan Lanning is the ultimate closer, right? Don't we? But let's just say that's how it goes. Now you got one top 5 class in 2026 for USC. And a lot of those players, might not be impact players on the team for another couple of years. Oregon, that would be their 3rd consecutive top 5 class. You maybe see where I'm going with this. Certainly a little bit. Like, if USC, even if they continue to stack top 5 class onto top 5 class, Oregon, I think, has much of a head start, certainly on them. So when it comes to the success on the field, Oregon already is one of the top Big Ten teams, and they're going to stay there because they continue to bring in better talent. I think a big question is maintaining. Will USC be able to maintain this year after year after year? And we have to go back to this last year's class. I think it was that 2025 class when USC had 2 5-star defensive line commitments from the Southeast, and they couldn't hang on to them. Now, that's why it's important for USC to really dive into the West Coast. I think it's really hard going over to that part of the country in the Southeast and to be able to maintain those guys and sign them over a long recruiting cycle. And that's why we're going to have more battles. Oregon is going to have more battles with USC, certainly on the West Coast. So you've got to be able to maintain classes year by year by year, and you've got to be able to maintain classes within a given cycle. It's more difficult now to hold on to players because of NIL certainly thrown around. You've seen what you saw Michigan, you've seen Oregon, like you've seen some of these big spenders certainly close late, and NIL and the financial part of college football recruiting has certainly played a big part in that. Now USC, it's been reported that their NIL game is certainly getting kicked into gear, but where does getting kicked into gear compare to maybe the Oregons of the world and what they're doing and what Michigan and some of these other schools certainly have as well? On the field is what this is all about. I talked about at the beginning. I talked about the head start that Oregon has on the recruiting trail. Oregon, of course, has the head start even for this season. Like you look at 2025, I think Oregon has another college football playoff caliber roster. They have another Big Ten championship caliber roster. Do they have a national championship caliber roster? That remains to be seen. I look at this USC roster. There is no doubt that they are improving, specifically on the defensive side of the ball, which we know that's where USC needed to improve, and they did last year, and I think they're going to get better this year. I think they're going to be a good defense this year. But they got a question mark at Lincoln Riley's expertise at quarterback. Jaden Mayava or a true freshman in Husan Longstreet, that doesn't really instill a lot of confidence. I think Husan Longstreet is going to be a really good quarterback down the road. But right now in 2025, those two options don't really scream typical Lincoln Riley success at the quarterback position. The offensive line, I think they lost a handful of starters over there, and that was not a great offensive line, certainly last season. And we know the transfer departures that they had early in the offseason cycle. We talk about the head start. And if Oregon can have another 10-win or an 11-win regular season, and USC with this team, hey, maybe they improve, they get to 7 wins, they get to 8 wins, but it's just another example of Oregon just being levels above USC right now. And just how quickly can USC catch up to a team like Oregon? Right now, I believe that USC is maybe more of a growing threat on the recruiting trail than it is on the field right now. Last thing on this. I am dialed into a number of recruitments in the 2026 class to see how much more of a threat that the Trojans are going to be on the trail. Because if USC closes really, really strong, I think this is going to become more of a conversation. I'm dialed into the Rider Lions recruitment. Oregon and USC, two big contenders for that quarterback over there. Brandon Arrington, Mark Bowman, I talked about him before. Tomahini Tupoi, the defensive line commit to Oregon right now. There's been some smoke. Maybe USC could possibly get a little bit more involved, maybe a flip. I think that one's going to go all the way down to signing day. Personally, I think there's both USC and Oregon very heavily invested into Tomahini Tupoi. So I'm going to monitor these specific West Coast kids. I'm going to monitor these specific West Coast recruitments where Oregon and USC are major players right now. If USC is able to get a majority of them, if USC is able to flip somebody like Tomahini Tupoi, then maybe we've got a bigger conversation on our hands. But we've seen it year after year after year. Oregon closes on the recruiting trail better than anybody. I've talked a lot about lately the whole Jonas Williams situation and why that has kind of went down the way it has. Oregon pushing their chips all the way into the middle of the Jared Curtis table. I've said that many times here throughout the last couple of weeks. But when I think about it a little bit more, and I think about the recruitment of Jared Curtis a little bit more, now that we're down to the final two teams, being the Oregon Ducks and the Georgia Bulldogs, choosing Georgia over Oregon just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me for Jared. Now, of course, Jared is going to make the best decision for him, and this recruitment is going to be a battle all the way down to December, all the way down to signing day. Even though multiple national recruiting experts have said Oregon does set the pace, Oregon is the slight leader in this recruitment, this will be a battle. But when you really look into it, and you really dive into it, and you maybe take the proximity of home and you kind of put that out to the side, and you really focus on the two programs in and by themselves, Oregon certainly seems to be a destination where Jared Curtis can certainly thrive and create a bridge from high school to a successful career in the National Football League as well. So before we get into that, we got to talk about the visits and when these visits are going down, both unofficial and official for Jared Curtis, which have now been set. Unofficial visits will take place in the spring. Jared will be visiting Oregon on March 8th through the 12th. He's going to be visiting Georgia on the 13th through the 16th. When it pertains to official visits, the June 6th weekend in Oregon and the June 13th weekend at Georgia. So whenever this is, and a lot of people have been saying out there, this recruitment maybe could be decided sooner rather than later. I think your hope for Oregon is that you impress so much, whether it's on the unofficial, whether it's on the official, that you can get Jared to cancel his trip down to the southeast, to Athens, Georgia, and you can wrap that thing up at that particular moment in time right now. But now getting to the decision, getting to maybe why Oregon is a better fit for the future of Jared Curtis. And it's not necessarily just Jared, it's quarterbacks in general and the recent track record and the way Oregon is trending at the quarterback position versus the way maybe Georgia has been trending at the quarterback position. And I get it. These are two very different offenses approach from the Bulldogs and versus the Ducks. Oregon is trending up as one of the power players in a conference that is starting to take over the SEC, certainly down in the southeast of the country. And the Ducks staff has shown the ability to get the most out of their quarterbacks. How about back-to-back Heisman finalists? And I think the big thing, Dylan Gabriel was already a developed quarterback. We know that. That's obvious, I think, to anybody who follows football. But the jump with Bo Nix to where he was and the struggles he was going through at Auburn, and then he jumps into this thing with Will Stein. He jumps into this thing with Dan Lanning. And the jump that he made during his 2 seasons, like that should be when Oregon is showing what they can do with quarterbacks. I think the first thing I think you want to show is the improvement that Bo Nix was able to make, jumping from the situation at Oregon to jumping from the situation at Auburn, to jumping what he was able to do certainly at Oregon, and then that leading to a really, really good a really good rookie year, not career yet. We're hoping he has a good career in the National Football League, a long career in the National Football League, but a really good rookie year. I think these 2 years at Oregon was that bridge to be able to get him to where he currently sits within Sean Payton's Denver Broncos, certainly right now. And then when you look at the talent that Oregon has and continues to bring in on the perimeter, how could you pass up the chance to throw the football to DeCorian Moore fairly consistently? We'll see exactly if where DeCorian is and Jared. They might only have 1 year together. I'd have to really do the math in my head. I'm not doing the math certainly right now, but it's not just DeCorian. It's the system. It's very favorable to, I think, quarterbacks putting up big numbers, having successful seasons, putting them in a good position to be highly drafted quarterbacks going forward into the National Football League. And a big part of that is the weapons that they are bringing in terms of pass catchers, certainly on the outside. And when you're a quarterback, you want to be protected by a great offensive line. Oregon has back-to-back Joe Moore Award finalists. And then you look at some of these guys in the 26 class that are coming in or could potentially come in with Jared Curtis, because a Jared Curtis commitment would now turn him into the recruiter maybe for some of these offensive tackles. Hey, keep me clean back here and we're going to win a championship. Cody Green is already committed to the 26th class. We've mentioned many times over the past couple of weeks, Emmanuel Iheanacho and Jackson Cantwell as well. And then you go back to the 25 cycle, Douglas Utu, Zaire Addison as well. This is Alik Terry is doing a phenomenal job, and Oregon is doing a great job maintaining the offensive line standard. And if I'm a quarterback, if I'm Jared Curtis, and I'm looking around at what's happening in this class of 2026, Oregon's got, 3 tackles that are in the top 10 in the country, regardless of position, that are going to be possibly at Oregon. Like I said before, I don't think it's going to be totally 3. I think it's going to be 2. But you have 2 tackles in the top 10. If I'm Jared Curtis, I think I really like that. There's a lot of reasons why Oregon is the favorite and why Oregon should be the favorite going forward. But Dan Lanning and this Duck staff, this would be a big get, because we know we've had transfer quarterbacks at Oregon. And Dante Moore, although he was originally committed to Oregon for a while, he is a transfer quarterback as well. I think it would be big, considering what happened with Jaron Sagapulitele, considering what happened with Jonas Williams. It would be big to be able to close on Jared Curtis for the future of this program. And then you're looking at Jared and Achilles Smith battling out to see maybe who could take over in 2026 or 2027. As we continue to look towards the 2025 season, a lot of national reporters, national columnists out there are putting out, hey, I think these players are going to be able to break out, but they're looking at it from a national lens. They're looking at, they're looking at it from a Heisman or an All-American type of lens that could maybe break out into that level. So they're looking at the Dante Moores of the world, maybe the Evan Stewarts of the world, and, those types of guys. But I wanted to take a little bit of a deeper, we know those guys. We know Amari Washington is going to step up into a bigger role at the defensive tackle. I wanted to take a little bit more of a deep dive. Maybe lesser known Oregon Ducks that I think could break out and break through and play some significant roles for Oregon this upcoming season. I want to start first on the offensive side of the ball. The wide receiver 3 battle is going to be one of the biggest battles in spring practice and as we head into fall camp and eventually the regular season. I've talked about that many times before. I think one of the leaders in the room for that battle is Kyler Casper. 6'6" Kyler Casper. The guy, when you throw it around him, he can catch just about anything. Kyler Casper. He played 117 snaps in 2023. And Junior Adams, now former wide receivers coach Junior Adams last spring, said Casper was making some big strides. And, of course, he got hurt early on during the 2024 season. And, I kind of watched some, I watched the Idaho game, and I watched some early season action that Kyler Casper was in for. And, when you had Trayshawn Holden go out in the Ohio State game, when you had Tez Johnson go down to injury, it was Justice Lowe that stepped up fairly consistently into that role last year. I think if Kyler Casper would have been healthy, I think it would have been more of maybe those two. You would have seen a lot more, I think, of Casper this past season. I think his skill set, I think his frame is different. And it mostly goes to do with his size, with his length at that position. And I think it just provides something a little bit different. It's nice to be able to have that size, certainly outside on the boundary. Like when you look at Decorian Moore and you look at Evan Stewart, I mean, they're fast as all hell, right? We all know that. And then, they're a little bit smaller, of course, compared to Kyler. So I think it's good to have a little bit of a different skill set, certainly on the outside. And I think I lean towards him. I lean towards I've talked about Jeremiah McClellan, Justice Lowe kind of coming out of the slot, Malik Benson, the transfer, coming over as well. Those are the guys that I generally like to lean towards at the wide receiver position. And the more I look into it, I really like Kyler Casper and Jeremiah McClellan to really stand out that position, specifically the uniqueness of Kyler compared to some of these other wide receivers in this battle and in this room. Let's head to the defensive side of the football. I am putting my money down, and I'm making a purchase. I'm buying Blake. 6'3", 260 pounds, outside linebacker, edge type of position. Now, he has the third most returning snaps at outside linebacker and edge coming back. He's got 40 snaps from last year. But He got on the field a lot as a freshman in 2023. He played in all 14 games, 179 defensive snaps, 10 pressures, and 4 hurries. He really showed a lot of promise in that 2023 season. Now, he didn't get on the field as much as expected. You had Amari and Winston, you had Jaden Moore at that type of position. Now, those two guys are out, and I think this is the year where you're really going to see the talent of Blake Purchase, where it started to flash a little bit in 2023. I think it's going to come on full bore, possibly this season. I'm expecting him and Elijah Rushing to really be the two guys that are going to step up at that position. And when you compare it to the two people that are departing, I think you're going to see an upgrade at this specific position over there. Of course, the Jack outside linebacker, Tatum Tuioti, is the main guy in this room. But I think you're going to see these guys rotate in a lot, specifically in pass rushing situations. Get him into third and medium. Get him into third and long. Let's bring in Blake Purchase and let's buy ourselves a sack. I'm really excited about what Blake Purchase can do in an increased role this season. And when Tosh Lupoi talks about Blake Purchase's future, it's not just his Oregon future. He talks about his NFL future as well. That's how much that they believe in Blake, that he can really take it to the next level. Let's stay on the defensive side of the ball. How about Peyton Woodyard over at safety? There's going to be a lot of maybe question marks and battles in the secondary, but I think the more time that goes by, the more confident I am that Peyton Woodyard is going to be the safety that's going to plug in right next to Dylan Thieneman. Peyton, 6'2", 205 pounds, and I say it all the time, but it is really hard to come into a place like Oregon and play right away. It is you see a bunch of 4-star players. You see a bunch of really good recruits, really good prospects, really good players, redshirt. Play less than the 4 or 5 games, whatever the rule is right now. But Peyton Woodyard got in, and he saw a good amount of time last season playing behind very experienced players in Tysheem Johnson and Kobe Savage. 58 total snaps, 35 at free safety. I know that might not seem like a lot, but he did record tackles in 5 games last season. I think he's going to be able to learn a lot playing next to a guy like Dylan Thieneman, a 2-time all Big Ten selection. I think that's going to be a really good group. I think a lot of people during this season are going to game plan for him. We got to know where Dylan Thieneman is on the field. Is he an extra guy creeping into the box? Where is he playing in the deep third? We got to know all of that. I think that's going to allow Peyton Woodyard to maybe be a guy that's going to be able to make more plays, whether it's coming in run support, whether it's going in and playing in some of these coverages on the back end and making a play, maybe creating a turnover. I think Peyton Woodyard is that guy. He was a 4-star, top 100, top 100, 120 type of kid coming out of high school. When I look at what's departing in Tysheem Johnson and Kobe Savage, and I look at Thieneman and Woodyard coming in, I think that's going to be a big upgrade at the safety position, and we know that's a position that has needed to be upgraded for the Oregon Ducks. Another edition of TSOW is in the books, and I loved every single second of it. Monday show with Travis Rook-Lay of the Ducks Rising NIL group is going to be absolutely elite. Make sure you subscribe so you know when that show is dropping. Make sure you like everything, and thank you for everybody for following that show out west. So until next time, I'm Ted LaRue, and this has been That Show Out West.